Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. I have a great guest on today. This is Geoff. Geoff, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to meet you in person finally.
Geoff, I've been looking at your website and I'm so excited to talk to you. You've been a vegan now for 40 years,
That's correct. 1985.
1985. So, 40 years ago, what made you decide? Well, first of all, how'd you grow up? Did you grow up into health or did you grow up sick?
Yeah. So when I grew up in educational background, which is why I'm fascinated with the education and science. And my father was an English professor, existentialist. My mother was a psychologist, a Jungian psychologist for children, underprivileged children. So there was a sense of compassion. My parents both marched with Martin Luther King Jr. My mom created the first lawsuit for equal pay for women, and won that $3 million against the educational system. So I was raised in an environment of social justice, of egalitarianism. For the life of me, I don't know why I didn't figure out that, because I was always fascinated by science. Jacques Cousteau was my hero growing up as a kid. Just seeing the underworld, sea, and a whole different world of life. I always felt connected to the animals. I caught animals all the time and kept them because I was just fascinated by them. I had pets, every kind of pet and everything, but I never made that connection. Now, I lost my mother and father and both brothers at an early age, and it sent me into a path of deep depression because I counted on that relationship of high quality conversation and integrity and empathy and compassion, and that just collapsed and that went away. And the depression became so intense, I couldn't take it anymore and attempted to take my life twice. Um, and I was, just in a bar drinking myself, doing drugs, smoking, everything, just to try to shorten my lifespan because it was so unpleasant for me. The mental and emotional anguish was just too intense. I just didn't want to go on. And I met someone who was just really, really happy. And so I asked her, I just walked up to her point blank and said, I want to learn to be happy like you are. I can tell you're happy. I'm not. I'm not getting how to be happy in this world that seems like it's a world full of takers. And I feel like I'm a giver. I'm a compassionate person. I'm here to serve, and it just doesn't seem like the right place for me to live. And she took me to someone, a healer, who talked me back into my pain and through my pain. I had such an intense breakthrough. It's just like my heart opened wide open completely. And in Greek, where my parents or grandparents are from, they have a word called metanoia. This is a radical shift or change in your whole life. And my whole worldview changed at that moment. My heart opened up. I got reconnected not only to myself, but to the greater world around me. And I felt so released from my own suffering. I said, how can I pay this back? I was so energized. My hands felt like they were plugged into light sockets. I was seeing colors and auras everywhere. It was ringing in my ears. I mean, it was just like this amazing experience. I felt like I was floating. Uh, I'm like, how can I pay this forward? How can I give this back? I was couldn't sleep, so I just stayed awake meditating. And when I looked outside and I saw the sun rising, I just felt that rise inside myself. And my higher voice just said, stop harming animals.
So, are you talking about a 1 day, 1 night event that happened here, or did this happen over
One
like
day,
one
one
day?
day, yes.
Wow.
And that night, after that experience, I had this epiphany. Oh my God, why did I not see this before? I quit smoking, I quit drinking, I quit doing all drugs, and I quit eating all animal products that moment 40 years ago.
Wow. Wow. Now, were you educated at all? Did you know what you were doing, or did you just like switch to a junk food vegan diet?
No, remember back in 1985, there wasn't a whole lot of
Sure.
junk food, vegan
Yes.
options. There weren't
So
very
you pretty
many
much
vegan
back in
options.
'85, you were eating untasty, healthy food.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. That's what it was: beans, grains, greens, nuts, seeds in their whole state, because that was the only
Sure.
food. Well, there wasn't meat analogs. There weren't
Sure.
much in the way of pack. There wasn't cereal. Cereal, yeah, it was oatmeal. That was,
Yeah. Yeah.
I was doing actually raw muesli. So went completely vegan and never, ever even had a second thought of changing. But in that moment too, I not only went vegan for myself, but I felt all these health changes starting to happen. More energy. I didn't need to sleep as much. I just felt mental clarity. My skin cleared up. I'm 61 years of age, and most people say, "How do you get your skin like that at 61?" And it's like it's. And so my passion was science, biology, and in college I was studying biopsychology, which is looking at more the whole body physiology and how it affects mood and behavior. And I said, well, wait a minute, everything in psychology is just looking at neurochemistry. And I'm like, well, that's not the whole body. You're not looking at what you put in the body to make those changes. So when I was doing some research, I looked at one of these chemicals that was inhibiting serotonin, our natural happy drug in our brain, right? Our neurotransmitter that allows us to be happy, along with dopamine and other things. But serotonin's a big happy drug. And I noticed there was this chemical that was inhibiting serotonin. And I'm like, that's preventing us from being happy. What is that chemical? And I found the chemical, and I don't remember it now. Don't quote me on it, because I've never been able to find that study again. But I researched it, and it's a chemical that is released by humans or animals when they are in a heightened fear state. And this is exactly what happens when we kill and slaughter animals, is they release this flood of chemicals into their neurochemistry to block serotonin. Why? Because serotonin makes us feel calm, relaxed, and peaceful and happy. You don't want any of those if your life is in threatened, is in danger. So what we found is that it's not the same chemical, the identical chemical that humans release, but it's close enough that our body thinks we are in a near death state. So we are consuming these chemicals. We are literally taking on the fear of death from animals when we eat the flesh, and tricking our brains into thinking that we are about to die too, constantly putting our brains under stress and fear of death. And we don't even know it. And you don't realize the difference that is until you remove that chemical and you go, oh, wow, this is what I can feel like. I've never had a single day of depression in my life in the last 40 years. To go from a chronic, constant state of suicidal depression to never even having a thought about depression, it's, it's just something I want to share with people. So I said, all right, I'm going to spend the rest of my life focusing on how the nutrition of plants helps our own human physiology, our mood and behavior. And I've been researching it ever since.
Sure. Sure. Now, as a vegan, I can say, I know vegans that are very happy, but I
Yes.
know vegans that aren't, and I know meat eaters that are happy, and I know meat eaters that aren't. So
Yes.
when somebody brings that to you, I mean, it's everything you said makes sense, but if it was true, it would sound like people that ate heavy animal consumption would always be depressed, and people that ate a vegan diet would always be happy. But you and I know that's not the case. So how do you explain that?
No, and we can override our physiology. You can give somebody a drug, and they can cancel it out through their own mental or will. It doesn't mean that the drug will always cause a certain response in a human. No. What I'm saying is you're setting yourself up for a propensity or a greater risk or greater chance. There's no absolute causal. Human beings can lift up cars that shouldn't be able to lift up cars. Why can they do that? Because they can call on our own chemistry. Our we can, through our mind and through our mood and behavior, over override almost all of our human physiological chemistry. We've seen that. I was fascinated. I became chaste, no sexual activity for several years, just to see what that is doing. I was reading research on this, and they did this study on Buddhist monks that were abstinent, right? No sexual activity whatsoever. And they said, okay, well, if their testes produce semen, but they don't seem to be producing anymore, what are their testes doing? Just going dormant. So they did a radioactive tracer to see if they're producing anything, and they were producing a chemical that was not seen in people who were sexually active. So the testes actually started functioning differently and producing a different chemical. So they traced that chemical, and it was going to the centers of the brain that controlled meditation. So they were actually using their sexual organs for heightened meditation states. And when I look back on many different spiritual or religious people using abstinence to try to gain a more, it's like, okay, well, that makes sense, but it's biologically, chemically happening too. They even took the adrenal gland, which produces adrenaline, and attached it to the spinal cord, and they found it started producing opiate signals to the brain. So we know that when somebody is like really needing to lift the car off the child, not only are producing adrenaline, which will give them amazing strength, but it will produce opiate signals so they won't even feel that pain until they remove the child from underneath the car. This is all chemistry, latent chemistry that we have inside of us that we're not calling on. We're just simply not asking it to. And it's not until we shift our diet, shift our physical activity, or remove things from our diet that we begin to see these traits start to surface in human beings, which is fascinating to me. What is our human potential when we do all the right things?
Really amazing. So you've been a vegan for 40 years. Uh, how's your health and do you get your blood work checked?
I do, and I get the same context. It's like, oh, you've got the blood pressure of a 25-year-old. Are you a runner? And I'm like, no, I don't run at all. Um, I get uh, all of my numbers checked, and they're all in line. It's funny. The two things that they say, oh, you're a little bit too low on is cholesterol. And now we know there's no such thing as too low. You can have almost zero cholesterol and still live a healthy, long life. We know that from a genetic disorder where they don't produce LDL cholesterol at all, and they live to a full life, even without producing any LDL cholesterol. Um, so when you look at those, oh, the other thing they say is, oh, your white blood cells are too low. And I always find that funny. White blood cells are defense cells. They're garbage men in our bloodstream. Their presence means you have garbage in your bloodstream. If you have a very low white blood cell count, it doesn't mean your immune system isn't working. It means it doesn't need to be there because there's no garbage in your blood. But they're just so used to seeing, doctors are so
Sure.
used to seeing higher white blood cell counts, they think that's normal. No, that's sick. They
Yeah, so
don't
all
know
your
the
other blood,
difference.
besides those two things, your blood tests are in range.
They're they're in better than most people half my age.
Well, since you brought up the cholesterol, let me ask you because I know just because somebody's eating a vegan diet, like you and I said, in these days there's a vegan junk food vegan diet, and then there's a healthy vegan diet. So, if a vegan is eating a junk food vegan diet, they can certainly have high cholesterol even though they're not eating meat. Do you agree or not?
Of course, yes. There are other things that can induce higher cholesterol levels. Smoking cigarettes can do that. Eating a high saturated fat diet or a high fat diet altogether can raise LDL cholesterol. Some people have genetic predispositions to cholesterol, so their genes are just doing that. So yes, it's not an absolute. I don't believe in absolutes. I believe in looking at the individual, doing the best things possible, and seeing how you can continue to modify that, and make it
Okay,
better.
give us an idea of your daily day. What time do you normally go to sleep, and how many hours of sleep do you get?
I normally go to bed around midnight and sleep till around 7 or 8, depending.
Okay, so you're getting 7 or 8 hours, great. And when do you eat your first meal usually?
So I do a high polyphenol drink, which is like chai tea, green tea, cacao, something like this to get a real rich source of polyphenols in my system. One, this hyperactivates my microbiome, so it's ready for food. And two, it protects my internal digestive tract too from anything. So it's a healing and repairing and prepping my digestive tract. And then once I've done with that beverage, then I'll make a fruit smoothie, usually anywhere between 5 and 10 different fruits. So again, boosting the polyphenols way up with berries mostly, and um, and then include some source of protein too, like the mycelium protein, which I'm using now.
So you're actually using it yourself now.
Mhm.
Okay. And when is that coming out?
Probably next couple of months, 2 to 3 months.
Okay. So what do you do after that? When's your next meal after that?
Then I usually get my workout in, and then I will have. I like to have like save my a little bit heavier meal towards the end of the day and keep it lighter, like a big tub of hummus with some greens, maybe a few pine nuts or something like that. Sprinkle of something that's polyphenol rich, like uh, cumin or turmeric in there too as well.
Okay. And when do you stop your last meal?
Try to get it before like 6 to 7 o'clock. That'll give me, 4 or 5 hours before bed. I try to at least get three
Excellent.
hours of not eating before sleep.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Few more questions, then we're going to finish. I appreciate your time so much. So, what do you think about people that switch over to a carnivore diet and they show improvement?
Okay, there's short-term improvements when you eliminate almost anything from the diet. It doesn't matter what you eliminate, the body will go into a hyperactive adaptation phase. In that adaptation, the body will go into a rescue mode. So you can see some positive benefits. Short term, people will improve like type 2 diabetes and blood glucose. Short term, they can improve their lipid profile. Short term is the key word here. So let's look at a keto diet, a low carb diet. So immediately it starts to change over to ketones, uh, but our brain will ketones act as a stimulant on the brain, not as a proper nutritional source. Our brain uses about 25 to 30% of all the glucose we intake. When you remove that glucose intake, it goes into panic mode, and it actually. So what people experience when they get ketones replacing glucose is brain stimulation because the brain is speeding up, trying to figure out how to process this and utilize this because it's in fight or flight mode. It's in starvation mode. All right. Because our cells, our mitochondria, the place that makes all the ATP, the energy currency for us, is based on glucose, right? Glucose is the foundational molecule to everything. Fiber, carbohydrates, fats, even proteins can all be broken down into glucose. So glucose is the foundational molecule. That's why our whole energetic system is based on glucose. When you remove that quick source of glucose, which is carbohydrates, and you have a harder source, the body can't produce enough glucose quickly enough to feed the mitochondria. What happens? The mitochondria start splitting up into smaller mitochondria. They're called micromitochondria. This makes our cell production very inefficient. And what happens is the mitochondria collapse. Now, we measured this in heart tissue, and something really scary happens. When the heart sees that it's not getting enough glucose to feed its mitochondria to produce energy for the ATP, not only does that heart cell die, but the heart thinks I don't have enough glucose to maintain a replacement cell for that. So let's put scar tissue in there and replace it. Now you've replaced a healthy heart cell with scar tissue, dead tissue, inactive tissue, because scar tissue doesn't use any energy. It doesn't require mitochondria. So it acts as a placeholder for a healthy heart cell. We've seen this scarification of the heart happen not only in animals, but in humans as well. It's frightening. So you're going to get these immediate short-term things, long-term, extraordinarily detrimental to our heart, to our brain, to every
Crazy.
major organ in our body.
It's crazy. It's crazy. So yeah, go ahead.
Heme iron. Okay, so most people thought, hey, heme iron absorbs better from our gut. That means we should be eating meat because heme iron is only found in meat, is in animal flesh. It's not found in plants. Okay, heme iron absorbs too fast, and that's the problem. So much so that heme builds up, or this iron builds up, and it causes what's called ferroptosis. Fer meaning iron, optosis meaning cell death. This iron causes oxygen to stick to it, which is corrosive and goes in and kills cells. It can cause, we now know it's a major cause of type 2 diabetes. It's a cause of heart attacks. It's a cause of stroke. It initiates cancer. It initiates colon cancer. It is the number one cause of colon cancer. Colon cancer is now the number one killer, cancer killer of males under 50 because they're eating so much meat. So when we see that, what does a plant produce? Instead, the plant produces non-heme iron, which is actually bound to this powerful antioxidant called phytate. We used to think, oh, phytate is preventing the iron from being absorbed. Exactly. It regulates that. Our microbiome comes and breaks off that phytate only when we need it. Now, what does that phytate do? Is that a bad thing? No, it's a powerful antioxidant. It actually can destroy cancer cells. It can prevent cancer cells from growing, and then it can actually go into the cancer cell and turn off the oncogene and turn that cancer cell back into a healthy, normal cell. There is not a drug on the planet that can do what plant heme iron, non-heme iron can do.
Wonderful. So as a 40-year vegan or 40 a vegan for 40 years, 61 years old, who loves the animals, do you with the technology today and the lab grown meat, if they found a way to create lab grown meat without affecting the animals, would you be tempted to try it, or you have no interest in that?
No, I applaud it because it's great for the animals. It's great, it's better for the environment, maybe. That's yet to be determined if they can scale it in an environmental friendly way. But obviously, if we don't have to kill animals to allow people to eat meat, for those, especially guys, who are just not going to stop eating meat, well, great. At least the animal doesn't have to die for it. But it doesn't remove the fact that eating animal protein increases TMAO, a known contributor to atherosclerosis, the number one cause of death in humans on the planet. It still contains heme iron, which is the number one cause of colon cancer, and number two cancer killer of human beings on the planet. They're still causing diseases, type 2 diabetes through ferroptosis, all of them only caused by eating animal proteins. Methionine. So if you look at the amino acid profile of a plant and of an animal, animals have higher methionine in them, all right? The proteins do. Now, they used to think, oh, plants are too low in methionine. I encourage everyone out there to type in these words in Google: methionine dependent cancer. All cancers, it's called the Hoffman effect. We even know it's reproducible. All cancers can be starved to death by removing methionine or lowering the methionine. They even said you can achieve low enough methionine levels to kill off cancer cells by simply switching to a plant exclusive diet. Cancer.
Amazing.
One other thing that I'm really cautious of that I've came across in my research, I'm writing a book on omega-3 nutrition with one of the top researchers out there, Dr. Tim Radek. If any of the viewers really want to see, he's a professor and he teaches courses in omega-3 nutrition. Brilliant. So I'm working with him on this. But one of the things that we found out that consistently, and it's non-debatable, it's a fact, that preformed DHA and omega-3 increases cholesterol. Now, a lot of even plant-based doctors have been telling people to take preformed DHA. I won't name names, but I've had many discussions with them about this fact that they are telling people that they should take preformed DHA from algae, right? The vegan source of preformed DHA. So I've talked to several people who were taking algae who did have high HDL. As soon as they stopped taking the algae DHA supplement, their cholesterol generally dropped 10 to 20 points almost immediately. So I'm really DHA also can lead to atrial fibrillation. This concerns me even more because we have multiple meta-analysis studies now that are showing preformed DHA from fish oil or algae can increase atrial fibrillation. Atrial fib or AFib is an irregular heartbeat. When you have AFib, you are at about a 63% increased risk of having a heart attack. Now, for me to see vegans out there that are fearing they're not getting enough DHA and taking algae DHA may end up causing their own LDL cholesterol to go up and cause a heart attack just really saddens me. And that's why I'm writing this book to really try to help that because I think there are doctors out there scaring people into thinking that they won't get enough DHA for their brain.
I see some supplements behind you there. Uh, things like B12 that and vitamin D, and things like vitamin K that vegans traditionally might take. I mean, do you take these or do you just get them all from your diet?
So I'm going to be bringing a plant to market. Let's start with we'll go by them one at a time. So vitamin B12, that's the most common supplement that almost every vegan and almost everyone should probably take. Um, Part of the reason is vitamin B12 is made by bacteria found in the soil, right? Plants will actually absorb some of that vitamin B12 or even bring the bacteria that produce vitamin B12 up into the root systems. So there's a biological exchange there going on. The bacteria actually break down the nutrients for the plant, and so there's a symbiotic relationship going on. But we have taken the plants out of their natural environment, which is full of fungi, full of bacteria, all this nutrient rich material, and even an exchange of vitamin B12. When we look at plants grown in nature, we see a much higher vitamin B12 content in the plant. So it's actually getting absorbed through the soil from the bacteria that are surrounding the roots of the plant that are giving a symbiotic relationship. So the plant will actually send amino acids and sugars down into its root system and into the soil to feed the bacteria. And in turn, the bacteria say, thanks for doing that. Thanks for feeding me. I'm going to break down the soil here so that it's easier for you to do. There's a good cross communication and there's a sharing of nutritional values there. The plant feeds the bacteria feeds the plant. In doing so, the bacteria they poop out vitamin B12, and that can be absorbed when it rains through this plant. So when we see biodynamically grown in bacterial-rich soil, we see vitamin B12 contents high enough that if we're consuming them almost exclusively, we would get enough vitamin B12. The problem is we would also get some out of the water because those bacteria are in the water too. But we sterilize the water now, so we've wiped out all the B12 from our drinking supply, and we've moved the plants to fields where there is no bacteria at all, so they cannot get B12 into the root system. So those two things combined are human beings interfering in the natural process of plants in nature, where we would have, just like every other animal, get our B12 from. Okay, with that, there is a water plant that actually still does this because remember, bacteria is in the water. So it's got its root systems, floating by in the water. But because it's floating and moving, it's not sitting in soil where it can communicate with it. It actually pulls that bacteria that produce B12 into its root systems, makes little nodules, like little condos for the bacteria to live in, and they survive in there. The plant feeds them and keeps them alive, and as they pull in nutrients, they break them down for them. So again, they've done that. But as you pull this plant called duckweed off the water and eat the whole plant, you can get 100% of your daily requirement of vitamin B12 in a single serving of what's called mankai. That's their trade name for this duckweed. I'll be producing that later this year. We're going to be the first in the country.
So when you say you'll be producing it, do you mean like in a supplement form or the actual plant that people can plant and use?
Well, let's not use the word supplement because that's an immediate defense mechanism for a lot of
Okay.
people. It's in its powdered state. It's a whole food. It's only dried and sheared. So it's mechanical and low heat dried. So it's raw. It's whole food. It's just powderized. That's all.
So you say this grows in water. So do you mean like ponds and lakes, or can people grow this in their house?
Ubiquitous in freshwater bodies of water all over the entire planet. So yes, anybody could grow it in just a few inches of water.
So if somebody's watching this now and they just like Google duckweed and they get plants, that you'd recommend them doing that.
Here's the caveat: don't wild harvest it. um, it is the fastest growing plant that we've ever seen. It is the most nutrient dense plant we've ever seen. It produces nitrogen or protein faster than any plant we know. That's how it can grow so fast. It can double its size in 48 to 36 hours. There's no plant on the planet that we know of that no true plant, not algae or whatever. There's no true plant that can grow this faster than bamboo. So with that, it pulls in nutrients from the water so quickly, so effectively, it's used for remediation, which means if you have a polluted body of water, you can throw duckweed on it, and within a few generations, it will wipe out, pull out all of the poisons and return them to the bottom in its organic state. So they use it to decontaminate bodies of water. So if you wildcraft it, whatever's in that water is going to be in the plant. If it's not pure water, you're not getting, you're at risk for getting contaminants. Um,
Sure. Now, when you
so
yeah, go
that's
ahead.
why I would only use personally a controlled source where I'm controlling completely the inputs for the nutrition, the water, the purity of the water. That's why it's aqua farmed or grown in very indoor procedures so that it doesn't get cross contamination.
And when you say pure water, and this is going to lead to another question I was going to ask you, and then we'll get back to the supplements. So, there's toxins that are in the water are going to be in the plant if the plant is grown in the dirty water.
Correct.
But if it's so when you say pure water, I mean there's natural spring water, and it's questionable these days because it gets touched by man. Then you get into the distilled and reverse osmosis water. So, what kind of water is are you growing this duckweed in? And at the same level, what kind of water do you personally drink?
It the For the plant to grow healthfully, it is a mineralized water using crushed rock, basically. Um, that's to keep the mineral balance there so that it can do
So
its
so
thing.
okay, so a
Yeah,
mineralized water that's a clean source is what you're saying.
correct, exactly. So you're controlling the inputs. You know the exact minerals that you're putting in, not some toxic heavy metals and things like this.
Okay, and on your personal level, wouldn't it make sense, I mean, to drink that same water or not necessarily?
That's a good question. I've always I almost always drink filtered or distilled water. The rain is a giant distiller, where we the planet is a giant distiller. Water evaporates from the heat of the sun and is distilled and basically goes into the air and then comes down, and that's what
Th
all plants.
There's a big difference between distilled and filtered water, though.
There is, and that's maybe a discussion for a different time. I I'm more focused on the nutritive value of the plants and the food. Um, yeah, there's
'Cause
lots of room
what I
for
find is, and the controversy is if you're growing plants in highly nutritious water, the plant's
yes,
gonna be highly nutritious. If you're growing
yes,
plants in toxic water, the plant's gonna be toxic. There's a
yes,
saying with our human bodies, some people believe that if you drink distilled water or reverse osmosis water that has no minerals, the body pulls minerals are
I'm
pulled.
I'm not buying that because
Oh,
the amount of minerals that are in the foods we eat way compensate for that.
eh,
The amount of minerals that you would find even in mineralized water is a fraction of a percent of what we get from foods.
okay,
So I do not believe that that leaches minerals out. That's you just
okay,
look at the quantity and it's just not in the same ballpark.
okay. Sounds good. So now, so duckweed for B12. When is that coming out?
So that'll be coming out later this year, probably towards the end of the year, maybe October, November.
October's next month.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah. So
Sorry, we got
when this comes out, you and I need to do another interview on this specifically because we definitely got to get to some people's hands. So this is a natural form of B12 that's
yes.
going to
It's
bless people.
actually it's all three forms, bioactive forms, adenosol, hydroxyl, and methyl. It produces all three because it's the bacteria that's producing it, and it's all captured because they live actually inside the plant. That it has been tested. It is bioactive B12. It is not a pseudo B12 like you see in some other grains like spirulina or chlorella or whatever. So this is true bioactive B12 because it's the actual bacteria that's producing it, not the plant.
Okay, so this is something you've personally been consuming for now for a while?
Since 2018,
Okay. Before
yes.
that, did you take B12 supplement?
I did, and currently, right now, it's the original grower that I worked with. This product right there, the Clean Green Protein, that was based on duckweed. That grower was the only major grower in the United States. They went defunct, so I haven't been able to get it. But now I have a new supply, and we're going to be the first to bring it to the United States market again.
Great, that's exciting. Okay, so on the vegan diet, what other supplements do you see people commonly taking that you found a better source for?
Vitamin D3. And for the same reason, because humans have intervened, we are indoors. We're not in natural light and we're not getting enough exposure to natural light by and large, in most first world countries. If you remove the human being from the light source, you've got to find a way to get D3 back into the system. Um, so originally, the two sources of vegan D3 were mushrooms, because you can expose mushrooms to direct sunlight, and they will start producing vitamin D3 as a defense mechanism. They normally produce vitamin D2 or ergocalciferol instead of cholecalciferol. Vitamin D3 is the form that our body actually uses to convert to 25-OHD. That's the active form. So we need to find a good source of D3. So mushrooms and lichen both do that when exposed to direct sunlight. But I was like, okay, well, that's the best we got. That's what I took for a while. But I finally found a pure form of vitamin D3 from algae, from organic algae. So I created that as an organic vegan D3 supplement. I was the very first to bring that to market too as well, because the mushrooms and lichen can have vitamin D2 in them. So it can be a mix of D2 and D3, and that D2 can actually inhibit the absorption and utilization of
What kind
D3.
of algae did you find it in?
It's a patented source of algae. I don't know that they're disclosing it in the patent, but it's
Sure.
a natural source that they identified was a rare exception. It's wonderful thing about nature is you'll always find an exception to the truth.
Yes.
It's like, okay, all mammals give live birth. Oh, well, except for the spiny echidna and the
Well, it's not
duckbill
really an
platypus,
exception
right?
because we created the precept of this is how it has to be. And it's like,
Exactly.
we're with the speculation, but nature's nature. So you're not a fan of algae for the EPAs, but you're a fan of algae, this particular strand of algae for the D3.
Because they have a process of eliminating everything except the D3. So it is true, pure D3, but from a organic, non-animal source.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So what's next on the list that's common? The K vitamin K?
Iodine.
Oh, iodine. Okay, I was gonna say vitamin K,
Okay,
but let's go to
let's
iodine.
talk iodine.
Okay.
Iodine would naturally be in the soil, but because of non-crop rotation that is putting nutrients back in the soil, Iodine is just depleted from our soil to the point. Selenium too, a bit has been depleted severely from our soil from conventionally grown foods. Hey, if you have your own plot and you're growing your own things, great. Be sure to keep putting the compost back into the soil so those nutrients get refed. But for the vast majority of people, especially living in the United States, they can get iron depletion and not iodine depletion. So iodine is really important for thyroids. Um, T3 or T4, there's called, is tyrosine stuck with three iodine molecules on it. That's our thyroid hormone right there. And we need it cycled because some of that gets lost every time. It governs our metabolism. So if you are gaining weight or unable to lose body fat, you may be low in iodine. Now, iodine is really particular. You can get too much of it and be hypothyroid, which means is not good at all either. And so you got to be careful with the very balance. And that's when I hear people say, "Oh, well, I take seaweed." Well, but yeah, one, you don't know the amount of iodine in that food, and even if you do, it's really easy to get too much of it because it's so high in iodine. So I'm cautious about that path. And for me, that's one of those areas that I think supplementation can be an advantage because you can control the exact amount of iodine that you're consuming on a daily basis to keep you in that narrow range of not getting too much and not getting too little for optimal metabolism.
Wonderful. And just so I remind the viewers, you're not advising people against consuming seaweed. You're just telling them if for the, from an iodine standpoint, take it from the supplement because it's controlled. Yeah.
Correct, because there are some forms of seaweed that don't have this problem. Like wakame is really high in iodine, whereas nori not so much. So
Sure, sure.
it's not all things. Just if you do are consuming seaweed, I think it has lots of good nutritive values. Seaweed's been used by humans for tens of thousands of years as a for nutrition. Is understand where the iodine levels are and make sure you're just not getting too much.
Sure. Great information. What about vitamin K? That's another one that I know you can get it from natto, which is like a soybean fermented food. But other than
Oh,
that, there's not that many vegetarian sources, right?
Okay, so let me clarify vitamin K. Vitamin K has a lot of different forms. Vitamin K1 is found ubiquitously in all dark greens and even other
Sure.
foods. So,
Vitamin
um,
K2, yeah.
vitamin K2 is the one that most people are talking about because if you eat a dark green kale salad, you're getting about 1,000% of your vitamin K in a single dish. Vitamin K1 is not an issue for most people, especially if you're eating fairly healthy, a whole food plant-based diet. The question then became, oh, vitamin K2, we only that isn't produced by plants, but it is indirectly. Okay, so how is that? You were talking about natto. How is natto produced? It is the fermentation of soybeans, right? Well, guess what happens when we put food in this giant fermentation tank we call our digestive tract? It ferments. And the same bacteria that produce vitamin K2 in growing natto are living in our intestinal tract in a healthy microbiome. Obviously, if you have taken antibiotics, especially broad spectrum antibiotics, you can wipe out those bacteria. Okay, so they measured K2 in a huge study, the NANES study. It's a nurses study where they tracked nurses, everybody across the nation, what they ate and how their health went. The highest rates of K2 deficiency were in people who just had and take a dose of broad spectrum antibiotics. Okay, this is one way we know that our bacteria is producing sufficient amounts of vitamin K2 because when you do those antibiotics, your K2 can drop 66% in one day. Now that's a problem. So I'm not telling people not to take antibiotics. They can be life saving. Please do not infer that. I'm saying is that when you do understand that it may take a little while for your body to build back up those K2 producing bacteria. So when you eat vitamin K1, our bacteria converts it to vitamin K2. Once that K2 goes into our system, it can turn into MK4, MK7, all the way through to MK13. All these are called menaquinones. Phylloquinone is the K1 that's in plants. Menaquinones are what our bacteria change. So you don't need an animal to change this for you. We have our own gut bacteria that change vitamin K1 to K2. So for a healthy person with a healthy microbiome eating plants, there is absolutely no reason. Our bodies will produce more K2 than we can even use. We know this because 60 to 70% of the vitamin K2 that we produce in our gut actually gets pooped out. We can't even use it. Our body says, no, that's way more than I need. Our liver stores it. So we even store up K2. So if we have a couple of days where we're needing to fast or can't find food, no problem. Our liver keeps a backup supply of vitamin K2.
Often when you find a vitamin D3 supplement, they combine it with K2 and they say, well, that's best for calcium absorption. And some vegans, I don't know if they're supplement or not, have calcium issues, but they promote the vitamin D3 K2 supplement as a combination. So why is it a combination, and does it actually help absorb calcium where from a vegan standpoint?
So that's marketing. And like any good marketing, it is based on some scientific fact that K2 helps pull calcium into the bone system, as a matter of fact. So vitamin D3 actually helps the body utilize that calcium, and then K2 helps it store in the bones. Okay, if that's necessary. If not, then you don't need them together. So the question more is, if you have enough D3 and you've got K2 sitting in your liver, you don't need any more K2. That's marketing. That's them putting two things that do go well together, but aren't necessary to get through supplementation because we are eating. Now, if you're consuming a really horrible diet and you're not a vegan or eating healthy whole food plant-based, and maybe you've taken antibiotics, well then yes, there may be a good reason to do that. But that's not the solution. The solution is to eat better, get some sun, and build a healthy microbiome.
And you believe if we're getting enough sun, we can get enough vitamin D?
Okay, so two things. One, you need direct sunlight and ideally over the entire body. We wear clothing, so that blocks us. Two, we can wear sunscreens, that blocks our vitamin D3 too as well. Three, we have some hair on our body, like the top of our head, which is where a lot of sunlight would come down. So all those things considered, yeah, if you're a nudist living in nature, yeah, you're probably getting enough vitamin D3. If not, it may be a smart idea just to go ahead and take a supplement.
We touched upon the calcium, and I know vegans, but I also know non-vegans that have osteoporosis, osteopenia, and calcium loss.
Yes.
Is this why does this happen in vegans?
Okay, so I think there is a little bit, not completely. Please don't take anything I say as an absolute. I don't talk in absolutes. Everything is contextual and everything is dependent on the individual and many different factors. But I think we're misinterpreting osteopenia. And I'll explain this in some cases. Okay, so women, when they're in a age where they can get pregnant, they're going to be carrying an extra 20, 30, maybe even more pounds of not only body fat, but the weight of the baby. Okay, so they're going to need more bone density to bear that weight, to support that weight. Bone is a response to pressure. The more if we put people in space where there's no gravity, their bone starts to evaporate, dissipate, because there's no resistance there. That's why they have that artificial gravity machine, which spins like this to get centrifugal force to put pressure on that so they don't lose their bone. They still get osteoporosis by being in space for extended periods. So the heavier people who are obese, are carrying more weight, they have much higher bone density than people who are light, who are lean. So when you see people go onto a plant-based diet or even raw, where you can get very lean, you're going to lose some of the bone density. That does not mean that you that is osteopenia or osteoporosis. Its meaning is your body is adapting to not having to carry weight, so that don't need as dense a bone structure. I mean, if that were the case, bone density would be the positive thing. That means we should all be obese because we'll have necessarily higher bone density, and we know that's not true.
Well,
So
but
you,
it does, but that doesn't that factor into the strength of the bones? Because like a lot of old people that have what's diagnosed as osteoporosis, if they fall, they might break a bone, a hip or something. But if an overweight person falls, you're saying because their bones are stronger, that they're not going to break their hip. I mean, it's
yeah, great question. And what I suggest is weight bearing exercises. Okay, so you don't have to carry body fat in order to have weight bearing. You can pick up some weights. Now, in nature, we would be active. We would be running, we'd be jumping, we'd be, picking down, bending down, picking up fruit, vegetables, climbing trees. We would be putting pressure on our bones, and this would keep them strong. Old people tend to be sedentary people, and therefore they're not exercising, not putting stress on that bones. You can take anybody with osteoporosis or osteopenia, given the proper nutrition, making sure they're getting enough micronutrients and macronutrients, and put them on weight bearing exercise, and their bone density will increase every single time.
wow. So it can be reversed.
100%.
Wow.
100%. Now, there, again, there are maybe extenuating circumstances like
Sure.
somebody doing drugs or alcohol or smoking cigarettes or, other mitigating factors that can contribute to that.
Great. So I want to, for the end of the video, we'll get into the weight bearing exercise and the fitness side of this. But from a nutritional standpoint, I love to consume sprouts. I
Mhm.
think they just enhance everything that's in the food to another level. Uh, what you're talking about with all these nutrients and vitamins and everything else, do you believe the sprouting the food, the microgreens and the sprouts uh, are beneficial? Or do you see any negative side effects to having stuff in the sprouted form or microgreen form?
I personally love sprouts too. I think they're not only super nutritious. Okay, so when people think about protein, let's just do protein as an example. What is the one of the most dense forms of protein? Is an egg, right? A chicken egg. Okay, why is that? Because it's got enough protein to grow a chicken. Right? It's a condensed form. Well, the same with seeds or nuts or beans. They're all seed forms. Is they're concentrated forms of nutrition that when you sprout them, they're released and activated so that those nutrients can be utilized by the plant to grow. Okay, well, that also means they can be utilized by us to grow. The only caveat or little asterisk about sprouts is that sprouts, in order to survive against predators, right, because they're the baby plant, is they produce some phytochemicals that are deterrents to pests. Now, this will help, like for ants eating them before they have a chance to grow into a full plant and have better defenses. Um, so some have asked, well, wait a minute, if they've got these phytotoxins, so to speak, to deter predators or animals from eating them or consuming them, does that affect us? Well, two things that I would disagree with is one, there's always the devil in the dose. So a sprout, a little bit of toxin may affect an ant differently than it does a 170-pound human being. So in our system, we have mechanisms to control for that. One, our digestive tract will help neutralize some of this. Two, our endogenous chemicals like antioxidants and things can help neutralize those. And then three, our body can adapt to those. You've heard of hormesis?
Not no.
Oh, okay. Hormesis is this idea that any um, damaging factor or toxin can actually be a vitalizing way to help human beings. It triggers an adaptive response to allow our cells to actually become stronger and more resilient. So, small amounts of toxins may actually be a good thing for human physiology because we are such an adaptive creature that introducing these small amounts of toxins, like in sprouts, could actually be beneficial and make our cells stronger and more resilient. And we've seen that over and over in studies, cell studies.
So I find the three things that I see a lot of vegetarians or vegans not talk about that I find in my own personal research that have been amazing is the sprouts. We spoke about the sea vegetables, and the other thing is fermented foods.
Mhm.
All of these things take things in a natural state and they kind of change it a little. In some ways, enhance, and in some ways, if it's not in a controlled way, it could be worse. Fermented foods are tricky because I find them being so beneficial. However, if you're not doing it the right way, they can be damaging. And I'm also personally a fan of fermented foods, but not fermented drinks, because I've seen people mess up the fermented drinks a lot quicker than the foods. What's your opinion on fermented things like cabbage? Sauerkraut and kimchi and any type of fermented type of vegetables.
I love sauerkraut and kimchi and pickles and things like this, fermented products. Tempeh is one of my favorite foods ever. Tempeh is one of those you either love it or you don't. You know? I just really like it. But even like fermented maca, it to me is just like, man, there's some foods that you'll find that you just almost crave, and those are that for me. But remember, we have a big fermentation tank. Our digestive tract is a giant fermentation tank. So what we're doing is just taking that fermentation outside of the body and fermenting the plants prior and then putting them in. Now, this can release different bioactives. It can increase probiotic activity, prebiotic activity. One of the things I really found interesting in my studies on the microbiome is we see that it's not only fibers that are fermented into short chain fatty acids, which have a whole host of amazing beneficial effects, but we're now seeing that even omegas and polyphenols can be prebiotics. So, amazing study on ahi flower. It's the richest source of omega-3s of any plant on the
That's the next
planet.
question for you after we discuss it. That's my
Yeah.
next one.
That it actually is slightly metabolized and produces these downstream metabolites by our bacteria called oxylipins, which have remarkable health benefits above and beyond the omega-3s in their intact self. So we're seeing all these amazing chemicals. Urolithin A. You're talking about pomegranate a little bit. Well, pomegranate has these amazing polyphenols, but our bacteria can break them down to even these cooler metabolites, which are can be 10 to 1,000 times more beneficial than the actual polyphenol themselves. So we've got this whole dance of chemistry going on when we consume healthy whole food plants in their natural states and do it in a way that actually helps promote healthy microbiome, which then creates lots of good stuff for us.
Now, after being a vegan for 40 years and somebody who exercises a lot, tell us about this protein powder. Tell us more about that because I want to hear about that.
Right. So all the protein powders on the market, all the plant proteins, all the whey protein are basically what's called isolated proteins. And you isolate just the protein or mostly the protein, like 70, 80, 90% protein. You're pulling that out, which means you throw away all the natural essential fatty acids, all the fiber, all the micronutrients. It gets just tossed out or fed to animals. So I'm like, God, everybody out there is eating plant proteins or whey protein, and they're throwing away the best parts of the plant. Um, but the reason they do that is so they can concentrate that and get 20 to 30 grams of protein in a single serving in a shake, right? Because otherwise, eating 20 grams is a whole meal if you get it in a whole food state. So I was like, all right, but there's got to be a whole food out there that is high enough in protein that could still mix and stir like that. And it's taken me 5 years, but I finally found it. And now we're going to be the first company in the world to bring a true whole food protein powder to market that will give you 20 grams of protein stirred in or shaken up in a cup and drink just like chocolate and vanilla shakes, just like normal.
And you already mentioned it. The source of that was the
Mycelium. So what is mycelium? We think of mushrooms, the fungi. The mushroom is just the very tip of the species. The 90% or more of the organism is underground in this broad network of, looks like dendrites, like brain dendrites. As a matter of fact, if you look at our brain under a microscope, it'll look almost like the branches of mycelium, the fungi, right? The root system, basically, of the mushrooms. The mushroom is just the sexual organ. That's what sheds its seed, its spores. That's why it kind of looks like a sexual organ of a human being, male human being. But you see that the lattice work of the mycelium, now it's really rich in nutrients, but it also produces some really cool amino acid peptides that are not produced by any animal or plant. This is where it gets interesting. Dr. Greger wrote about it. Dr. Greger, obviously, right? It's called ergothioneine. Because now some researchers and nutritionists are saying this should be an essential nutrient because we have receptor cells on every single cell of every organ of our body for ergothioneine, because it is the most powerful antioxidant, anti-aging peptide that we know of today. Now, I wanted to find a way to get a whole food substitute so you didn't have to consume these isolated plant or animal proteins. I also wanted to find a way to get more mushrooms in people on a regular basis because of these super nutrients that are found and made exclusively by the fungi kingdom. Now we've got both.
So, what have you been using? Have you been using protein powder over the years, or have you not just been using anything?
I'm like 95% whole food plant based. And then I use some supplementation, like vitamin D3, or I've used vitamin B12, ahi flour as a supplement to complement my whole food nutrition.
What about a
So
protein powder? Have you used something over the years? Pea
I
protein or
I
something?
have, but I have always been looking for a whole food version of it instead of an isolated version, and I just
The
found it
reason
and
why I
made it.
ask, the reason why I ask is because we're going to get into this now. You're obviously getting enough protein. I mean, and you've been getting enough protein. So if you're doing it with the way you've been doing it, why did you even need to change it? Because yeah, there you go. I mean, you're 61 years old. You work out, and on your website, I'll put the link below. Everybody, you can see his physique. It's great. Now, and we know, I hope people know that muscle comes from working out, not from taking a supplement. But if you're doing so great and thriving the way it's going now, what inspired you to say, "Well, I need to go even better," because you're at the top of the class here. So what's driving you to say, "I got to go better"?
Well, the very first question I've been asked by almost everybody who finds out that I'm vegan is, where do you get your protein? So obviously, we now know that all essential amino acids is what you need to make proteins and make muscle, and that all 9 essential amino acids are made by plants. Animals don't make essential amino acids. Again, that's why we call them essential. Remember why the word essential is there is because all humans, like all animals, have to get them from outside of our body. We can't make them. So, this idea that we need to eat animals to get protein is just silly. Um, but it is one of the biggest concerns of men. When I look at the statistics in America, at least, 80% of the vegans in the United States are women. Why are guys so resistant to the idea of veganism? And it's because we've instilled in them that somehow it's more masculine to kill an animal and eat it than it is to save an animal's life. To me, that's a hero. We see on social media and on YouTube people saving a deer drowning in a pond, and everybody cheers them on as a hero. But then they'll go and eat a chicken sandwich. And I'm like, wait
Exactly,
a
great point.
minute. Are you not making the connection here? You're a hero for saving an animal's life, and then you go kill one. No, and who are our heroes, right? Our heroes are people that save lives. Those are the real heroes. And I think we need to change that dialogue, but we need to start with, hey, can you be masculine? Can you be physically fit? Can you gain muscle? Can you have strength? Can you look good? Can you feel good? These are going to be important to men because they're dragging the movement down. They're an anchor on this movement, men are, unfortunately. And you and I are men. We're exceptions to the rule, whether we like that or not. So I was like, how can I reach more men where they're at? And if I can get more men taking a protein because it's going to extend their life, because it's 100% bioavailable and digestible, a PDCAS of one, and they can build more muscle, well, great. I've got them to stop consuming some animal protein and I'm consuming some mushroom protein instead. Awesome. That's fewer animals that are going to hide for it. So I've tried to, I've quit trying to convince men to do it. And I've just said, why not just give them products that will actually make them choose something different than an animal?
Well, there's people like Tory Washington that he's doing it with the, I guess, the pea protein, and like you can be very successful. Is it people don't want to hear pea protein? They're looking for something new. What's
Pea
thriving?
protein is isolated protein still. Remember, you're
Sure.
removing all the fiber, most of the
But from what you're
micronutrients.
saying, with the standpoint of men thinking they're going to be weak, they could still utilize it to build muscle.
They can, but if you can get them consuming a whole food and think it's just as good as whey protein too, how much better are they going to feel eating a whole food than an isolated protein,
Can they get
right?
those mushroom roots by growing the mushrooms? I know it's a big, complicated, comp, co- complicated thing, but can they do that, or do you need to actually like process it into the powder form to be able to utilize it?
No, you can. Okay, so to clarify, there are two species, genus species of mushrooms that went in two different evolutionary directions. One, which is a lot of the common mushrooms that we consume, have a defense mechanism. They chose a defense mechanism of mycotoxins. Myco meaning mushroom, toxin. Everybody knows what that is. All right, so that genus species went in one direction, producing obviously poisonous mushrooms, but also mushrooms that have mycotoxins in them. Some of them we can tolerate. Some of them, some people can't tolerate and can die from them, while other people won't be harmed by them. That's one strain. There's another evolutionary branch that didn't produce these mycotoxins at all. That's what I'm going to produce. Something that's completely safe for everyone, regardless. If you look on some of the mycoprotein food products out there, they'll have a little warning label at the bottom. If you are allergic to mycoproteins, do not eat this. It can be toxic for you. Ours won't need that because our evolutionary strain does not produce any mycotoxins at all and is safe for everyone to eat.
How much time do you spend in the gym?
But depends. If I'm doing like shoulders, I can spend 30 minutes to 45 minutes in the gym. If I'm doing a larger body part like back, like yesterday, it takes me about an hour and 15.
You go every day?
I go 5 days a week and give my body rest for a couple of days.
Did you self teach yourself, or did you work with a trainer?
I picked up weight training when I was in high school and college. I was a swimmer. So that's when I started using weight training for strengthening my swimming and increasing my speed. But I just loved it. And I love the way it made me feel. I love the health benefits of it. It strengthens bones. It increases. They found an amazing study that there's chemicals released right after a workout that are so protective they actually can reverse cancer cells. They can force them back. They can kill and wipe out cancer cells. So just a single bout of workout can lower body fat, increase your metabolism, so many health benefits of working out.
How tall are you and how much do you weigh?
I'm 5'9", 180 to 85.
Okay. What does your shirt say, Jeff?
Go vegan and nobody gets hurt.
Go vegan and no one gets hurt. I like that. So Jeff, do you have a family? Like, what's your situation?
My wife and I, we have no kids, but our kids are all the rest of the animals on the planet that we're hoping to um, allow to have a better life.
So what about your wife? Is she a vegan?
She has been vegan for 30 years, and I've been vegan for 40.
Wonderful, wonderful that you could do this together. All
Yeah.
right. Well, is there anything else you want to add?
Oh, thank you for having me on, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. This is an amazing conversation. I would love to come back on and talk with you when the protein and when
I
the
would
duckweed launch, because they're extraordinary plants that I'm so proud to be able to make accessible to more people.
I
You
would
know that
love that.
they're
Yeah.
in the powder form. You can travel with them. They're shelf stable for 2 years. It's anybody can incorporate them in their diet, whether you're a busy executive or a teacher. It doesn't matter. This makes it more easy to consume them on a regular basis, and something that you wouldn't find in a grocery store. You're not going to find mycelium in the grocery store, and you're not going to find duckweed in the grocery store until you do. Until we do get that to that level, at least people can have a way of consuming these extraordinary food sources to help promote health and longevity in an easy way.
Jeff, I'm going to put your website below, but I want you to tell people, for those that can't read, what is your website?
Well, as you can see, it's Clean Machine. For the website, it's cleanmachineonline.com. And I do podcasts every Thursday. I talk about mostly about the latest research, all of the health and nutritional research that comes out that's really changing what we know or what we thought we knew about plant-based nutrition.
Wonderful, wonderful. Everybody, definitely check out the links below. And I'm definitely looking forward to these products here. And everything you said today was wonderful. So thank you again for joining us. We look forward to having you back. Have a great day, man, and thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health Show.